Let's move on to this then. The International Court of Justice hearings on Israeli settlements in Palestine and East Jerusalem have entered their third day after 52 countries that have indicated that they will make submissions. Members of the Arab League, including Cuba, made presentations. The two UN Security Council members, the US and Russia, also made their submissions. Let's get more details now from SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, thank you so much for your time. Cuba, Egypt and the UAE making their submissions today. What was the content?
Well, clearly the three countries that you spoke about were supporting Palestine. They were insisting that the court must rule against Israel settlements in Palestine, including the East Jerusalem, saying that this is the violation of international law. Let's take a listen at what Cuba, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates representatives had to say.
All this takes place with the complicity of countries such as the United States of America, responsible under international law for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the apartheid regime that determines where people can live, work, and move around depending on their ethnic and religious backgrounds. Members of the court, we and you bear the high moral, historical, and legal responsibility to pronounce ourselves in a clear, transparent, and forceful manner on the ignominious situation of the Palestinian people and to demand international responsibility for what is happening in the occupied territories.
It is shocking that at this critical moment, some states would rather see this court abscond its responsibility as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations by declining to render this advisory opinion. What message does this send about these states' respect for international justice and the rule of law?
The obligations to cooperate and to ensure respect for international law carry implications for states in the exercise of their vote on the Security Council. Voting against or preventing the adoption of a Security Council resolution that seeks to put an end to serious breaches of international law cannot be compatible with such obligations. Israel's violations also have implications for international organizations. The organs of the United Nations can and should take all steps within their respective mandates with a view to ensuring an end to those violations. The UAE remains firmly committed to play its part in supporting the principles of international law which underpin the international system.
And two permanent members, as we said in the intro, of the UN Security Council, the US, of course, and Russia making their own submissions as well. Let's start with the United States. What did they say?
Well, the United States of America insists that the court shouldn't rule against Israel, saying that this will affect the current process to ensure that there's peace between these two nations. And America saying that at the moment there are negotiations behind the scenes, and therefore if you impose measures and also orders that are likely going to make Israel angry, you are going to affect the peace process. But one thing that all countries agree on is that there must be a two-state solution. Let's take a listen at the U.S. representative.
A few days ago at the Munich Security Conference, Secretary Blinken emphasized that it is more urgent than ever to proceed to a Palestinian state, one that also ensures the security of Israel and makes the necessary commitments to do so. In light of these considerations, the court should not find that Israel is legally obligated to immediately and unconditionally withdraw from occupied territory. The court can address the questions before it within the established framework based on the Land for Peace principle and within the parameters of established principles of occupation law. Mr. President, Members of the court, as I said at the outset, you have a difficult task before you. Others have asked you to broadly construe the questions and the law. They have asked you to try to resolve the whole of the dispute between the parties through an advisory opinion addressed to questions focusing on the acts of only one party. The United States disagrees with that this approach would be consistent with the court's role within the United Nations or the established UN framework for achieving peace through negotiations. Hamas's attacks, hostage-taking, and other atrocities, the ongoing hostilities and the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza, and the violence in the West Bank reinforce the United States' resolve to urgently achieve a final peace that includes the full realization of Palestinian self-determination.
It's quite interesting also that Russia had to make submissions to this very court, as well as, especially when you're given the fact that the country itself is accused of violating international law with the ongoing war in Ukraine. How did they frame their submissions?
Well, they started by emphasizing the relationship between Russia and Israel, that they are very strong and that they will continue to ensure that the relationship between Israel and Russia is strong. But the Russian representative was very hard on Israel, saying that the fact that after the International Court of Justice delivered orders in relation to the provisional measures that were requested by South Africa, a day after, the statements made by those who are in government in Israel continued to fuel tension and also inciting the tension within the two nations. And he emphasized the fact that this speaks to a state that is not willing to respect international law. Let's take a listen at what Russia had to say.
At a conference in West Jerusalem, cabinet ministers openly called for deportation of Palestinians from Gaza and presented a map with 21 settlement blocks. One cannot help noting that the event was held 2 days after this court indicated provisional measures in the South Africa versus Israel case. The court agreed that the situation in Gaza poses risks of irreparable harm to the rights of Palestinians guaranteed by the Genocide Convention. This fact alone underscores the gravity of the situation. In this connection, it's worth recalling that this court, in its advisory opinion on the wall, recognized that the Israeli settlement in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, had been established in breach of international law. As explained in that advisory opinion, the settlements are contrary to the principle of inadmissibility of acquisition of territory by force.
So what happens now? How many countries are still left to make their submissions?
Lots and lots of countries. You also have the Arab League, the African Union, and of course other states that are expected to deliver their observation or perhaps their submissions. We expect Fiji to take the line of the United States of America, but the rest of the countries, most from the South, are going to support Palestine. And therefore, we still have a long way until next week. But this matter will also dominate the G20 Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting in Rio de Janeiro starting today.
And we'll touch more on that with our correspondent Ira Spitzer later on in the show. Thank you so much for that update. That is SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena.